Just how many transgender people are even in the military? Well, the number that has been bandied about by the left recently is 15,000. Is that true? Here to explain what she's discovered on this subject is Mary Margaret Olohan. She's a senior reporter for the Daily Wire and the author of D-Trans, True Stories of Escaping the Gender Ideology Cult. Mary Margaret, great to have you back with us. Merry Christmas to you.
Hello and Merry Christmas. Great to be back.
Okay, so Joni Ernst says, look, we've got such a recruitment problem. We definitely need transgender people to join the military. 15,000 are in the military? Where does that number come from?
Well, it's pretty interesting to hear Joni Ernst saying that, because that's also what these very far left organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, the ACLU, are all trying to say. And they cite this 15,000 number, which I found super interesting because I saw this number a couple months ago when the left was saying, if we get rid of our trans-identifying troops, we're going to be facing some kind of military crisis. And I said to my boss, Brent Scher, there's no way that number is real. And so we started doing some digging, and turns out it's just a number that these pro-transgender groups came up with years ago, I might add, back in 2014, based on data from 2008. And they've been touting that number for over a decade now, which is insane. And a lot of the time, what's even more insane is that these pro-transgender groups and these leftist media outlets don't bother to even cite their sources. So you'll see one of these outlets, let's say Newsweek, talking about how there's as many as 15,000 trans-identifying troops. And you go look and there isn't even a link. So I asked two of these groups, I asked the Human Rights Campaign and another lefty group, where are you getting this from? And they both sent me the same study, which is from 2014. And that leads me to believe, Vince, that they're all using the same study, the same numbers, because they don't have anything better to base their claims on. And the fact of the matter is that the number of trans-identifying troops is actually much, much lower. However, we should still probably be concerned because they're getting taxpayer-funded transgender reassignment surgeries, and then they're just hanging out in the military in safe places because they can't be deployed to a war zone if they're recovering from a double mastectomy or something worse.
Yeah, I mean, has the United States military provided any data to you on this?
So we asked many, many times. I spent a good chunk of my week last week asking the DOD, asking Army, Navy, all of these branches of the military, how many trans-identifying troops they had. And what's very interesting is they would not tell me, and they told me, and keep in mind, we're talking about Biden's DOD, which talks about transgenderism and LGBTQ and DEI all the time. They told me, we don't track that, and we don't reveal that information.
Bull.
Which I found, I found it pretty laughable.
It's bull. It's the United States
that
military. They track every little thing about the members of the military. They know if you're married. They know if you're single. They know what your tattoos are. It's every element of your life. You turn over to the United States military, and they say they don't have any data whatsoever on if you are delusional about your sex.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, the Navy said the Navy does not collect transgender information for reporting purposes. So what they're saying is we know purposes. In some cases, but we're not going to reveal it. And I think the reason for that is we did some more digging, and we found out that under Joe Biden's administration, they, of course, reversed Trump's policy and started allowing trans-identifying military members again. But they also messed with rules around reporting this information on them because they said it was discriminatory for the public to know how many trans-identifying troops are.
What?
And at the end of the day,
why would it be discriminatory? I thought this was something to celebrate. Why wouldn't they be bragging about the numbers? Why is it a problem to list this out?
Well, a couple of reasons. I think the optics are terrible because, you can't really have it both ways. You want to say there's 15,000 trans-identifying troops, but then if you want to also say that there's 15,000 troops that are undergoing whatever surgeries they please on the taxpayer's dime, that's not good optics. No. So I think they've found themselves in a little bit of a conundrum here. And, I talked to a bunch of different people who explained to me that, these are former military veterans who told me they do know that there are people who identify as transgender in the military, and the number has risen, but there's no way that there's 15,000.
I know, and the point of wielding a number like that is, oh, if you were to ban this from the military, you would debilitate it. You would debilitate it. So it's a form of sort of like national security, moral blackmail or something. I can't precisely put my finger on what you would call that, but it's meant to say, how dare you suggest that men can't be women, and if they're of that delusion, that they somehow shouldn't serve in the military. And so you stay out of this is really what that statistic means. And it reminds me of, remember years ago there was this, everyone was using the statistic that Americans use 500 million straws a day. Do you remember that? Plastic straws. It was, yes. Everybody was using the same number, 500 million plastic straws. First of all, how does a nation of just over 300 million people use 500 million plastic straws a day? Just a very basic sort of tire kick on that question. And then it turns out, so everybody had cited that number. USA Today, CNN, The Washington Post, The Wall Street Journal, Fox News, The New York Times. Everybody's using 500 million plastic straws a day. Finally, a reporter chased down the number. It was a 9-year-old boy in Vermont who literally invented that number. He did some napkin math, and he's like, I think it's 500 million. And the media used it for years, Mary Margaret. And now you're telling me they're doing it again, yet again, unsurprisingly, with so-called transgender troops in the military. 15,000. They all repeat credulously without anybody going back to the source except for you?
Yes. And you know what, honestly, I was incredulous when I realized this, because I thought, how am I the only person that traced this data back? But it's true. For over a decade, everybody's been citing this and saying that there's 15,000 trans-identifying troops. And I find it particularly crazy because back when this study came out, it should have raised serious alarm bells. In 2014, that they were claiming there were 15,000 trans-identifying troops. Are we serious? And yet this is what's been behind all of these claims for years and years and years. In fact, I talked to this guy, Chris Bray, who's a veteran, and he's got a really interesting Substack where he was talking about a lot of this stuff. And he was telling me the point of doing this, like when you make up a number like this, he called it catastrophizing.
Yes.
He said you make up a number, and then you use the invented number to create a catastrophe that doesn't exist. And the point of that is to make debate impossible. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about with this straw example, where they just made it up. It makes debate impossible. It makes it seem like if we take any kind of action against trans-identifying troops in the military, then we will not be prepared if there's any kind of war or if there's any kind of incident that makes us need to defend ourselves. But what's even crazier about this, Vince, is that I was looking through the book of our incoming Secretary of Defense nominee, Pete Hegseth, and he had some really interesting thoughts on all of this, trans troops in the military. He even writes that he talks very extensively about how it makes you undeployable when you undergo these surgeries. And I'm going to keep it PG here because I don't want to be disgusting, but they're very invasive surgeries. They take a long time to recover from. They involve a lot of maintenance. And, he was making a joke, like, you don't really want someone who's recovering from this very invasive surgery to be like in your platoon when you're in a war zone. And not only that, but they can't be there. They're not fit to be there.
Well, in other words, it's a debilitating thing, a debilitating surgical intervention. And in fact, I don't usually do this, but Mary Margaret, if you could hold for a moment, I do have a caller calling in. Mara is in Stafford. Mara, you are on line one. Mara, you're a nurse with DOD?
Yes, I still am a nurse case manager, but I worked at the Quantico Clinic, or the Quantico Navy base, or Marine Corps base, I'm sorry.
Yes.
At the Naval Hospital, and I actually was the IDES LIMDU coordinator, nurse case manager, and IDES is the Integrated Disability Evaluation System, and limited duty for the Marines. So what also is they're not taking into account is when some of these, Marines have transitioned, mostly going from female to male, now they have to pass the PT test under the male standard, and they will be ad-stepped when they fail, which most of them do. Of course, I don't have those statistics as well, but that's another thing that happens too. On top of when they do have the surgeries, and then there are the complications, which I think the nice lady on that you have, your guest, has also brought up. But then they're medically discharged because now they're responsible for them. So now with those complications, tax dollars are going to be spent with their continual medical care until basically death.
So in your experience, the idea of somebody who's, quote, transitioning, returning to regular duty is almost non-existent.
Exactly, because we were getting them like literally right out of AIT. They would show up at Quantico for their first duty station, and then all of a sudden announce that they joined the Marine Corps as SAM, but now they want to be SUE.
Oh, and so in other words, taxpayers have to cover the entirety of their transition, and they never serve any meaningful time in the military.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
Got it. It's Mara.
Incredible.
Thank you for that. That's a very useful contribution to this conversation. Yeah. So, Mary Margaret, it's like you've got overstatement about the extent of the problem, and to the extent that it does exist within the military, you've got people who are exploiting the system in order to, let's face it, hurt themselves, and then not actually serving meaningful time after that happens. And here we are. And you contacted the Pentagon for answers. And their response was, sorry, that's not to be shared in public?
Literally, that is literally what happened. And the fact, too, that, we got to keep in mind, I wrote a whole book on this. People who are trying to undergo these transitions are almost always across the board very mentally ill. So they're already struggling seriously with mental illness and they need help. Yeah. And then they're entering the military. They're let's say they are put in an active war zone or they're, in a tight spot. They need to be prepared and able to handle that situation. And if you're undergoing these hormones, this is messing with your mental state as well. So there's so many factors here that make this not an acceptable situation to be putting their military, colleagues in as well. So the whole thing is insane. And I think, you take a step back and look at it, and most normal people would laugh and say, obviously, that's a bad idea. Obviously, that's a bad use of taxpayer funds. Obviously, that's something that's going to make members of the Army and the military, Army and the Navy and, the Marines furious that they're being placed in this situation. And I know they are because I've talked to a lot of them. Yeah. I know young men who are fathers who just want to serve their country, and they're being put in insane positions, whether it's with the COVID vax and the mandates, and now with, drag shows on their ships, and then Biden encouraging the transitioning of military members, and then the crazy restrictions they face if they speak out. So, I know a lot of these guys are really excited for Trump to be back in office, and, all of this, I started writing about all of this because a bunch of mainstream outlets started writing and saying that Trump was getting ready to remove trans-identifying troops from the military.
There's one more thing that Mara said that really stands out to me that I want to dwell on for a moment. The fact is, and I think she was referring to the Marines specifically, that you have all these women who came in who said they want to transition to become men. And then the Marine Corps said, fine, we'll treat you as men and hold you to the male standard for physical fitness in the military. And apparently they wash out as a result of that, because in reality they're women. And I don't know, I don't know whose thought that was in the Marine Corps. Maybe it was some Marine who was like, look, fine, if we have to live under this world, you're going to be treated to the male standard. I don't really know, but boy, it is amazing, isn't it? That's even happening.
It is. And right. And of course we know that would happen. Any rational person from the outside looking at that would say, well, she's a woman, so she's not going to be able to meet the male standards. But unfortunately, Vince, a lot of these women are mentally ill. They think that transitioning is a magic thing that makes them men because they're mentally ill, and they don't have the proper guidance from real doctors and therapists who will say, no, actually, you're a woman and you're not going to have the physical fitness abilities of a man. So this is all a mess. It needs to be turned around. And I think, Trump hasn't officially said what he's planning on doing, but I think a lot of us can guess. So here's to 2025, right?
Yeah, and anybody who makes a wise decision is going to be informed by reporting that you have done. Mary Margaret Olohan, thank you for constantly screaming that the emperor has no clothes. I think hopefully more people will wake up as a result of it. Thank you, and Merry Christmas again.